Cecere, and today I am interviewing Deepak Goti from Bristlecone Labs in preparation for our Supply Chain Insights Global Summit. We're going to talk about the future of supply chain 2030, which is the focus of Imagine. But before we do, let's hear from Deepak a little bit about what you're doing at Bristlecone Labs and what excites you right now.
Well, first of all, the space in supply chain and the technology adoption that is happening is very exciting in many different ways. For one, supply chain as it was 20, 30 years ago hasn't had the opportunity to change as much, but the newer technologies coming in the domain around, say, artificial intelligence, around blockchain, around, networks, are significant changes that are happening, and those coming into the domain of supply chain are going to be greatly beneficial to the companies adopting them, and also, I would say, a lot more fun for the supply chain analysts who are actually going to be a part of this journey and adoption as such. So that's exciting. At Bristlecone Labs, we are part of this whole movement and part of this whole process, ensuring that we can bring in these technologies to our customers. My personal background is more from supply chain for about a decade or so. Then I went and did a lot of stuff around data, analytics, visualization, and so on, and coming full circle back to supply chain as this domain and space is about to take off into another next level so that we can do a lot more interesting and fun stuff.
Well, Bristlecone has been a consulting firm, but Bristlecone Labs is a new entity. What's the difference, and why should people care?
Yeah. Bristlecone has been in the business for about 18 odd years. Over the years, we have done hundreds of implementations for customers, big and small. Over the last 3 years or so, we have basically identified some of the domains and areas that we have driven value for customers. And the thought process was, can we take some of those best practices and bring it in to a software sort of a process combined with a little bit of services, essentially ensuring efficient delivery and efficient value that we can bring to our customers. That's the genesis of Bristlecone Labs. And in Bristlecone Labs, what we're trying to do is fill the gap between standardized supply chain processes with applications or products that we can actually implement really fast for customers to drive significant value. Example of that is, let's say, in the demand planning process, historical demand has always been a core facet of how demand planning was the forecast was created. We are taking the idea that events or external factors could impact demand in a much significant manner than history would ever. And to incorporate that, we identify events that happen in and outside of your supply chain and give the user an overlay on top of your supply chain, be it on demand, it could also be on transportation, or it could also be on your procurement orders, and show you the impact of that event. The supply chain analyst at that point of time could take a decision to effectively react to that instance of change that happened externally. So sort of bringing in the outside in perspective to your supply chain. So that's sort of what Bristlecone Labs is focused on doing.
And Corning is going to be speaking at the event. I understand you've been doing some work with Corning, and I love seeing Lora and Dina on stage. Can you talk a little bit about that case study?
Yes, definitely. So Lora was the pioneer who transitioned the Bristlecone Labs team to think in terms of design thinking. We engaged with Lora's team way back in 2016 on smaller projects, but her thought process was get to things faster, get to the business value faster, and get to prototypes faster. Not even prototypes, but pre-totypes. So literally, a hand-drawn sketch is better, but let's talk visually. A simple PowerPoint is better, where I could have some vision, pictures, and so on, but let the user interact so that the thinking that is going on in their minds can be incorporated into the software. So that's where the journey with Corning started. Over that span of time, about 3 years or so, we have done almost about 20 plus different initiatives and projects with Corning. And these span all the way from the idea that I mentioned earlier in terms of event sensing, demand sensing on the Corning supply chain, to actually identifying the economic value that happens across the entire Corning supply chain, going all the way to the procurement of raw materials, tracking things like oil and plastics and so on that could possibly impact what is going on in the corning supply chain. So we work with them on all facets of these things. It's a very long-standing, very positive relationship. And I should say every conversation that my team has had with Lora, with Dina, the two awesome people who are going to speak at the conference, has been very, very fruitful. I would share with my team that 30-minute conversation with Dina would bring me 30 different ideas I can take home and actually work on. So I would really encourage people to be part of that conversation at the conference.
So we probably will get 60 new ideas that people can just get out of that presentation. Well, let's talk about Supply Chain 2030. What do you think it looks like, and what are you working on that people should ask you about at the conference?
Yeah, we are definitely working on getting the technology adoptions happen. These would mostly be around the idea that we are looking outside of the supply chain. I gave you the example of event sensing. We are also doing the same thing in terms of tracking, monitoring, and sensing the inventory that exists either on large spaces that are moving across, let's say from overseas to a U.S. port on ship. We're also tracking inventories that happen on rail cars, on trucks. Not just the location, but parameters like vibration, tilt, jerk that could happen that could possibly damage my inventory. Also, we could monitor things like, understanding, say, gaseous emissions out of products that I want to control, temperature for, say, the cold supply chain, and then predicting when it reaches, what should I do with it at port? If there is a significant exception that happened on the parameters that we were tracking, should it now go through an extended quality assessment that happens when it gets to port? So these are things that we're bringing in from an external perspective to your supply chain. We're also bringing in the idea that it has to be customer-centric, which, needless to say, demand is customer-centric, tracking, monitoring of inventory is customer-centric, but even procurement, understanding what materials are we procuring, that also can be highly customer-centric, especially in today's domain and age where, political climates change, trades and tariffs and transparency in your supply chain change significantly. And every time that change happens, I want to have a robust, efficient supply chain that can effectively respond to those changes as fast as possible. So, for example, I would like to identify a supplier or build redundancy in my supply chain where I'm trying to procure something or consistently have procured something, but I can swap to an alternate supplier depending on, say, tariff changes, depending on a weather alert. And all of these things impact how we look at the supply chain, so making it more customer-centric. The second point we would be working on is probably more impactful for every single person on this planet, which is around climate change. So think of the changes that are happening in our global climate. For example, heat increase is causing changes in supply chain in a drastic way. It's causing mass migrations. The nature of supply chain that existed is shifting dramatically in different areas and ways that happen. At the simplest level, it could impact weather changes that happen. So, for example, if I'm a transportation manager and I have 30 trucks that go across I-94 on a regular basis, on that particular day, I have an alert that says wind speeds are going to be more than 25 miles per hour. Should I actually have the trucks go by, or should I delay it by a few hours, right? So these are things that we would help at the simplest level on climate change, but also in a big way to identify events that have an impact and giving the user or the analyst an impact monitor to sort of say, which one should I act upon? And the third thing we're bringing in is technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain. And while these are technologies that have been talked about for quite some time in other areas and domains, we are bringing it into the domain of supply chain. So, for example, if I have digital component of my supply chain may be significant, but some part of it could be non-digital where I have paperwork and so on coming in from my procurement, from my suppliers. And that paperwork needs to be identified, digitized, and integrated into my existing supply chain. We are using artificial intelligence techniques to understand images of documents and gleaning out data from there, gleaning out text from there, contextualizing it, and digitizing it and integrating it into our customer supply chains. So these are significant because a human being could possibly look at, say, 40, 50 documents in a day. But because of the things that we're working on, you could have thousands of documents pass through, and the human can just be in the loop to ensure exceptions are taken care of. So three areas: customer centricity, being able to look at an outside-in view of the supply chain, using technologies in different ways that can enhance supply chains to be more robust, efficient, and faster. And the last part, I should say, which is across the board, is the whole technology adoption piece, which we think is very, very critical for supply chains and usage of technology.
So I see that you've got some things on the slides. Do you want to talk a little bit about your solution?
Yes, if I may just share my screen real quick here. All right. If you can help me, are you able to see this in slide mode?
Yes, we can see it in slide mode now. Yes, thank you.
I'll make this really quick. So this, what we're working on, is what we call as Trace.ai. This is the product that we're using for driving end-to-end visibility across the supply chain. It's not just visibility on where your inventory sits, but transparency and traceability to my supply chains, which can be external, as in outdoor. It can be intersite, which can be smaller distances, or inside my warehouse, where I can pinpoint with precision down to the less than a meter by meter or so as to where a particular inventory sits. We are also including newer technologies in this, like computer vision to understand automated inventory collection, also using computer vision to identify how things can be compared before and after a particular process is in place. We do monitor things like, not just the location, but temperature, humidity, shock, pressure, and a host of other parameters as well, plus integrating across different hardware vendors back into a common platform. We have seen success in this with customers in various different ways. Corning, of course, is one of our users, Sleep Number, who's also a recognized supply chain from the work that you have done, Lora. So we are very excited about these customers and the work that we have done with them. The second bit I wanted to just share was around this part we call Sense. And Sense is the idea that I shared earlier, which tracks events that are externally identified, an event library being built, and that event library overlaid on top of your supply chain to highlight exceptions in terms of your demands, changes in forecast, exceptions in terms of your transportation or procurement orders. This essentially is your risk management or your early warning system to identify what could possibly be going right or going wrong. Going right as in capitalizing on your opportunities, or going wrong as in mitigating your risk. And we have seen success with this from Corning and with customers like Toshiba. The third bit, which I shared briefly, was the idea that we can optimize procurement processes, helping a user to understand when could they do proactive buying rather than reactive responses to a certain change that happened after the fact. Is the price correct? Who should we buy from? Can we identify alternate suppliers and so on? And this, of course, has the backdrop of the Sense product as well, that ensures that events can be overlaid on top of that. And we have seen some good success with customers in this area as well. The last bit I want to share in just the next 15 seconds is this idea that I shared earlier, which is taking documents which are paper-based, either as PDFs or images, and gleaning data out of that and automatically integrating it in your supply chains. So the best part is this is more of an API sort of a process, completely lights out. And when the integration happens, even if the digitization of your supply chain is partially complete, we can make that happen almost immediately. And over time, as your digitization completes, these processes can change and modify in different ways. So this is what we have done, and we have seen success with customers in this domain as well. So that's what I wanted to briefly share with respect to slides and the concepts that we're working on.
Well, thank you, and I hope that people engage you at the Global Summit. I know that you guys have done some great work for some clients, and I appreciate your time today. Until I see you in Chicago.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
All right. Thank you. Bye now.
Take care.
Cecere, and today I am interviewing Deepak Goti from Bristlecone Labs in preparation for our Supply Chain Insights Global Summit. We're going to talk about the future